Welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Guide. Have you ever heard the phrase, when the going gets tough, the tough get going? Well, when the going gets tough for wise decision makers get mathing. Don't worry, you don't need any calculus or advanced math to do this. Simple algebra, stuff you use on a profit and loss statement, works fine for you to make really complex and hard decisions relatively clear and simple. Today, we'll discuss a pragmatic and effective strategy that you can use to do that you can apply to the most critical, the most important, the most complex decisions that you're facing, and make them in a clear and transparent manner that will help you and your team make the best decisions possible. Maximize your success and avoid threats and problems on these critically tough choices. Now, why do you need to do math anyway, right? Many people might be asking that. Well, because our brains are not really very good with intuitions and gut reactions. They're really bad at especially the tough decisions that you have to make that are really complex, really big, and really challenging. Bet the company decisions like hiring a new CEO, launching a major new product, choosing a major new company strategy, deciding to enter a huge new market. These are really tough decisions that matter a lot, and our brains are really bad at dealing with them. Or let's say bet your career decisions, like leaving your cushy corporate job to start a new nonprofit, or joining the leadership team of a failing company that you're really hoping to turn around. Or perhaps really important personal decisions, like deciding to move to a new city or buying a house. These are huge decisions, and we need, in those cases, to get as far away from our intuitions as possible, and numbers, using math, helps us do so. Now, if you've been following the Wise Decision Maker Guide for a while, you know that our gut is adapted for the ancient savanna, not the modern world. So our gut reactions are really bad indicators for making wise decisions in situations that don't involve savanna-like saber-toothed tiger fight or flight reflexes, like getting out of the way of a moving bus. Yeah, go with your gut in that state. But if you're making a decision on which house to buy, don't go with your gut. If you're making a decision on which new job to accept, don't go with your gut. Think about these things. If you're deciding on a new product to launch, don't go with your gut. And our instincts are really terrible at numbers and in-depth analysis. And numbers and in-depth analysis are exactly what you need to do to use for those really complex, tough decisions that matter a great deal to your success. Now, unfortunately, you'll very often hear business gurus, self-help gurus, and firewalking gurus telling you that, especially on the most critical, tough decisions, you need to go with your gut. Really terrible, terrible advice. And it's not like they're evil. It's not like they're wanting you to fail, but they're just telling you what's comfortable. And going with your gut is always the most comfortable thing. That's the nature of going with your gut. It's comfortable. It feels good. Going with our gut feels good, but it's really bad for us, especially in those critical decisions. They do what gets them paid, telling you what's comfortable for you, and that's really unfortunate for your success. It's very bad for your success on those critically important decisions. So, our emotions are especially going to steer us away from the right path on those really bet the company, bet the career, bet your personal finances decisions, and they will cause us to fall into the dangerous judgment errors that result from how our brains are wired and from our evolutionary heritage that scholars in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics, people like myself, call cognitive biases. So in those critically important choices, you need to work especially hard to go against your intuitions. And you need to work especially hard to use your head and not your gut, to not use your primitive instincts, and instead focus on being as civilized as possible and using the learned complex behaviors of mathematics and analysis to have the best chance of making the right call on those tough decisions. I'll share an easy-to-use strategy that you can use for this called Avoiding Disastrous Decisions that I developed to use with my clients. So I've been doing, in addition to my scholarship, I've been doing scholarship for over 15 years in academia, including 7 years as a professor at Ohio State. I was also doing and am doing speaking, consulting, coaching, and training for business leaders. And with them, I've been applying this strategy called avoiding disastrous decisions. And we've perfected it now, and so I'm sharing it with you for folks who may not be able to hire me to actually help you make those tough choices, but you can still take advantage of this research-based expertise that has been tested on the front lines of business reality. So, before I go into the strategy itself, let me share a story about how I used this strategy. And I used the strategy when I was looking at my personal finances, personal financial life, to buy a house. In fact, it's exactly this house where I'm living right now. You can see the house right around me. That's my office. So let me tell you the story. My wife and business partner, Agnes, and I were doing house shopping, and that was I believe in 2016. We're doing house shopping, looking for a house in the summer of 2016. And, I remember entering the backyard of this house it was an intense day of house searching, and it was beautiful. It was like entering a lush grove. It was just gorgeous. There were shady trees. They protected us from the summer heat. It was amazing. And I just thinking like, oh, what will this backyard be like in the fall? All those gorgeous colors. I love fall colors. I just go watching the trees in fall colors. So it would have been amazing to have that in the backyard, though, I was thinking. So it would have been kind of a magical experience. And I imagined myself lying in a hammock under the trees, in the fall, early fall, and watching the trees, watching the leaves fall. It was, So I had a really great experience. And Agnes, my wife and business partner, also had a great experience. She loved the house. It was great. The backyard, we were both in love with the backyard. She really liked the kitchen and so on. It was great. So we didn't realize at that time that the backyard was kind of a trap. Yeah, it was a trap. It was essentially something that really couldn't deliver on the emotional promise that it made when we entered that backyard. But we didn't realize it at the moment, so we were really excited, and we asked the realtor to bid on the house. We were just motivated by that attachment to the one aspect of the house, the backyard, that was really great for us. And that's a cognitive bias. That's an error. That's called intentional bias, where we are focusing on what is most emotionally appealing to us about the situation, as opposed to the whole situation, making a thorough, very effective, and very considered judgment in such a hugely important decision. So Agnes and I made that bad decision on the day of the house search when we were kind of exhausted, but we slept on it and we were more clear-minded the next morning. So we applied the avoiding disastrous decisions technique to try to math our decision by comparing that house, that with a backyard, to our second choice house. And I took a photo of our calculations, actually. It's in the book that I made one of my first self-published books, called The Truth Seeker's Handbook, a science-based guide. And here you can see a photo of this calculation. It was kind of a back of the napkin calculation. Well, not back of the napkin, but you know what I mean. It was just kind of on paper because we weren't doing we weren't using a spreadsheet. We were just kind of writing it out together. So we compared that house, and that was the first choice house that's labeled 170 here, and that's the second choice house labeled 450 here. So 170 and 450. Now, to avoid excessive attachment to any part of the house, we wrote out the various parts of the house, which is in the first column, and then we gave each a quality rating from 1 to 3. And then to account for the actual usage of the house, we again gave a similar rating for expected usage. So there's quality rating and usage rating. And next we multiplied the quality by the usage to give an overall weighted rating. And of course we separated them individually. So this was A for Agnes, and this was G for Gleb for both of the houses. So A for Agnes for house 170, which was our first choice, G for house 170, which was our first choice. And again, same thing for the second choice, for 450, A and G. And finally, we added them all up in the bottom. And both of us were really surprised by the result. It's kind of hard to see here, but basically, our second choice house beat our first choice house by a lot. By a lot. It was 95 to 67.5. That's a huge difference. That's a huge 95 to 67.5. That's almost 50% difference. So very big difference, huge difference. And we tried to jiggle the numbers, we played around with them, and no, it was still huge difference. So what was the nature of the difference? Well, partially we realized we'd use the backyard for only a part of the year, maybe half the year at most. We'd really get enjoyment out of the backyard. So the usage was lower for the backyard. So the house we live in right now, 450, it has a much less fun, fancy backyard, but we're not going to use it nearly as much. However, 450, where we live right now, has a very nice screened-in heated porch, so Florida room, which we can just sit in year-round, and we use that, and we check out the outside even when it's snowy. Whereas that other house, 170, which used to be our first choice, didn't have anything like that. Also, it had kind of a poor arrangement for the furniture we want to bring, so that was not great. The kitchen was nicer in our original first choice house, but I don't really use the kitchen much, so I rated it lower. And it had the first choice house had less bathrooms, and that was going to be kind of inconvenient. It's nice to live in the house that we currently live, where Agnes and I both have a bathroom to our own. So we realized we made a serious error, but fortunately it wasn't like something that cost us money yet. So we called the realtor. We asked her to change the bid from 170 quickly to 450, and that it wasn't a problem. And we didn't put it down any deposit money or anything like that. And we were very excited when our bid on 450, the house where we live in right now, was accepted. It was very exciting. So it was really awesome. We moved in. We haven't looked back since. We were very happy. We are very happy with this current house, and the backyard works out fine. Although it doesn't have the beautiful trees of the previous one that the other one would have had. So, I really shudder to think what would have happened if we got the other house. It would have been really inconvenient, kind of cramped with a layout of the house and the bath. It would have been really annoying to share the bathroom. So that wouldn't have been great. We would have spent the long winter looking out the windows, whereas here we sit in the Florida room and we can see, stuff around us. It's very nice. Also here, there's a pine tree in front of the house, so we get evergreen right in front of the house all year round. So that's great. So what I want to ask you, what problems attentional bias might cause you like it caused us for that house, when perhaps you'd be too drawn in by an aspect of a new position that's offered to you, and forget to look at all other aspects of this position, think about it in consideration. Perhaps you'd be very attracted by a certain aspect of a merger. Perhaps, a company has really great technology that you want, but then you're not thinking about its internal culture and how that might very seriously clash with your internal culture. Or, you can have the same sort of mistake when, let's say, you're looking to buy a car and you're not thinking about all the aspects of the car. You're just attracted by how you feel when you drive it, for example. And remember, attentional bias is one of over 100 cognitive biases that could pose a serious problem for you when you're making really, really important decisions. Now, by applying the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique, you can address a lot of these cognitive biases automatically. And that's what helped Agnes and I make the wise decision on buying a house, and can help you make a wise decision in critically important situations. So use this technique when it's worth it to spend some serious time on the calculation. It should take you probably about an hour or so to go through the whole technique. And if you're doing it together with a team, probably closer to 2 hours. Now, why does it take that long? Partially because I suggest you use it together with the technique called making the best decisions. And that's a more broad technique that applies to all aspects of the decision-making process from start to finish. Whereas Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique simply applies to the step where you make a choice between two or more options, rather than other aspects of the decision process. So I tell all of my clients to use the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique together with making the best decisions technique. And that is much better, much more effective when you use those two techniques together for your really serious, critically important decisions. And the blog to Making the Best Decisions technique will be linked in the show notes of the episode. So let's go on to the Avoiding the Disastrous Decisions technique, which is what we're talking about today. It has 8 steps. So first, you want to list your decision-making criteria. Write out all the important and relevant attributes of the decision that you'll be making. So what kind of criteria do you want to use to make the decisions? You want to stick to no more than 10 criteria if at all possible. And don't get stuck in analysis paralysis trying to list all the possible things. Aim for 10. If it's less, that's great. Really don't go for more. It really won't help unless it's a super critically important decisions. Now, for making a key hire, let's say you're hiring the CEO or the COO, think about using criteria such as salary requirements, fit into the organizational culture, ability to perform job, connections outside the organization, contribution to diversity, and so on. So these are the kinds of criteria that you would make. If you're going through this process as a team, brainstorm the categories and then vote which ones should make it into the top 10. And then put them into a web app for easy calculation. Now, the nice thing about the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique is that to make mathing easier for you, we created a web app to help guide you through this process. And that's linked in the blog that is linked in the show notes about Avoiding the Disastrous Decisions technique. So you can easily find it and put the information into the web app. Step 2, weigh the attributes. Decide which ones are most important to you. So you use a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the lowest importance and 10 is the highest importance. When Agnes and I used the technique for the house, we made 1 to 3. I later did some more research and revised that technique because it seems like that's not a large enough interval to make meaningful differentiation, significantly important differentiation. That's why I increased it to 10 based on subsequent research that has come out. Now, make sure to use this step honestly. Evaluate really, truly what criteria are the most important to you. So, for example, if let's say you have a great budget and you can say that salary requirements are not that important to you. So you can put salary requirements at 4. But let's say it's critical that somebody matches your organizational culture. So you make fit into the organizational culture at 9, meaning again, it's a critical factor for success in the hire that you make. And if you're doing this with a team, come up with weights independently and anonymously, and then just average them out together. All right, step 3. This is where you rank the options on the criteria. Rank each option on the criteria that you're choosing using all of the attributes that you wrote out earlier. Use the decision matrix table, rank each option from 1 to 10. So for example, 1 would be lowest, 10 would be highest. So again, let's say you're comparing Mary, John, and Ella for the CEO job. You say that for salary requirements, John doesn't have very high salary requirements, so he's an 8. So he's quite good on that. Then Ella has high salary requirements, so she would be a 5 on the salary requirements. And then Mary has really high salary requirements, so she would be a 2. So that's how you would rank the options on each of the criteria that you choose. And if you're doing this as a team, brainstorm rankings together and then average them out. All right. Step 4, you math it. The web app does that automatically for you. What you do essentially, you multiply the weight of the criteria by the ranking. I'm not going to go through it in detail. It's all lined out in the blog, and the web app does it automatically for you. Now, step 5. Step 5, you might be surprised by this one, but I'm going to recommend that you check with your gut. Now, the gut causes you to make many mistakes, so you don't want to rely on it too much. However, it can be quite helpful in certain situations where your intuitions might catch something that your rational, logical analysis would not. So you want to check with your gut. Think about whether you'd be surprised by the outcome. Think about, would you look back and wish you had a different decision? You made a different decision. So think about these things. Play around a little bit with the numbers, with the weighing and ranking. Try not to fit them to your preferred option, but play around with them a little bit and align them. See what would happen if you rejiggle them to align with your gut intuitions. Now, the next step is when you check with your head. You want to make sure to always check with your head while consulting your gut. Always check with your head. Never trust your gut simply by itself. Always check with your head. So here's where you check for potential dangerous judgment errors. I mentioned there are over 100 potential dangerous judgment errors. I made a list of 30 that are most applicable to business settings, and I made an assessment for you to evaluate whether they're present in your organization, in your team, in your decision-making process. And that's a blog that will be linked in the show notes to this episode. So pay particular attention to cognitive biases which you know you're vulnerable to. So I, for example, I know I'm vulnerable to optimism bias. I tend to think that the grass is green on the other side of the hill. So I know I need to really watch out for that. I tend to be risk blind and not think about the negatives sufficiently. So pay particular attention to those things. And again, focus specifically on dangerous judgment errors that might come from looking at your gut and consulting it too much because you just did it in the previous step. So again, play around with the numbers, look by compensating for some of the dangerous judgment errors and see what kind of numbers you get this time. Okay, so you did that. Now get to step 7. Set red flags. Decide what kind of red flags you want to make for evaluating whether your decision is not going well. So if relevant new evidence emerges to influence the rankings, what kind of evidence would it be? So for example, let's say you're very close to hiring Ella, and then you're consulting the references, and one of the references says something pretty negative about Ella. Then you want to be able to integrate that into the rankings and consider how the rankings would be impacted by this new information. So that's important so that you're not swayed by short-term emotions when any new information bubbles up, because what this reference says about Ella, compared to all the other evidence you have, it might not be that relevant. So you want to be able to compare it effectively and not have attentional bias on this one thing that this reference said. And you also don't want to deal with simmering disagreements within the team if you have different thoughts about what option should have been chosen. And then when anything goes wrong about the decision, when any problems come up, people say, oh, I told you so, you shouldn't have gone with that. You decide on red flags in advance and you say, if this happens, we will reconsider the decision or we will play around with the rankings. All right, at that step, the web app automatically allows you to math things, to multiply things out and see what is the best option for you. And what you want to do is make that choice and stick to it. Commit to it and go forward with that choice unless one of the red flags situations happens. Now, making commitment has been shown by extensive research to make you personally much more likely to be happy with your choice and significantly decrease conflict in a team setting. So, you made that choice, and that's the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique. Check out again the blog. I've mentioned a number of blogs. There's the blog on the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique itself that's linked in the show episode notes. The blog on the 30 most dangerous judgment errors, it's linked there, and the blog on the Making the Best Decisions technique. Now, my goal with the Wise Decision Maker Guide episodes is to provide you with the utmost best value possible in avoiding the mental blind spots, cognitive biases that cause us to make terrible decisions and really hurt us going down the road, going into the future. And I hope that learning about the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique has helped you do so. Please share your thoughts about it. Has it helped you? Where do you think you might use it? In your personal life, in your professional life, in your organization? How do you think it might be helpful to you? Please share your thoughts in the comments to the episode. Now, I would like you to click like if you liked this episode and to make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet to continue getting the Wise Decision Maker Guide. Make sure to share this episode with other folks who you want to avoid disastrous decisions by using the Avoiding Disastrous Decisions technique. And follow me on social media, you'll see some links to it, to get not simply the new content on the Wise Decision Maker Guide, but also all other content that I create on avoiding disastrous decisions and making the wisest decisions by addressing cognitive biases, and also content that I curate from other folks who make similar insights on how to address dangerous judgment errors. You can learn much more about this topic in my book on avoiding dangerous judgment errors in business settings and making the best decisions, called Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Now, the best free resource I can offer you on this topic is to sign up to the Wise Decision Maker course, which is linked in the show notes to this episode. And I hope to see you on the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Guide. Wishing you the wisest decisions, my friends.